Greetings, it is I, PATHFINDER Dracovin, Lord and Emperor of the Dracovin Empire. Welcome. It is time to continue our discussion on the Pathfinder role-playing game system. We were talking about, of course, campaigns last time. Let's talk about ending your campaign. This is an important one. So, 20th level is sort of the capstone level that you're normally going to reach in most games. Traditionally, you're going to end a game either there or some point before then. When your characters reach a certain level, whatever level that is going to determine on what you decide with your players. You're going to work it out with them. Either, if you're running a normal campaign that's based out of a book, normally it ends at a certain point in time, and whether the adventure continues or not is up to you and your characters. If you're running a custom game, then of course you're going to have to try to choose this. There are certain things that are more appealing. Odd numbers, for example, are a lot more appealing for an ending level because once you gain that odd level, it's a new level of spells. So you get a big level of spells. Every 5 levels is also a very appealing number sort of to go on. 9th and 13th level have very kind of capstone abilities, have big abilities that a lot of classes gain. So those are actually very appealing as numbers of levels to stop at. Regardless of what you choose of when to stop, it's up to you entirely mostly as the GM in order to determine when that finally is done. Again, talking with your players about it is very important too because it gives you an idea of where they want to reach their characters to in their levels. Now, this does not mean you can't go above 20th level. It is recommended that you don't go too high above 20th level. It becomes harder to balance out combats, and you don't have as much material to go through. There's not as many threats. You're going to have to build similar threats. And the fact is, it's sort of like you've reached the pinnacle of normal mortals. Anyway, but there is material provided in other game systems, which is very compatible with Pathfinder. For example, in 3rd edition Dungeons & Dragons, which is compatible with it, there's the Epic Rules Handbook, the Epic Level Guide. That's going to be the main one, but there is other sources that talk about being in epic levels that, as I said, are compatible. Again, they're not 100% compatible, so there can be some problems in amongst it, and it might be better just to either move to another game system or just to, again, start over from scratch. But if you really insist on doing it, there are some basic criteria that you're going to have to know about, regardless of the systems, and these are important to know about how it works in the Pathfinder. More rules will be given out at some point in time by Paizo when they decide it's important to do. But they haven't decided that it's important to publish that yet. So talking about those basic rules that you're going to have to look at when talking about having an epic level character. Base attack, hit dice, saves, they will go up as you level the normal rate they've been going up. Your hit dice, of course, will be the same. For attacks, you can only get up to a maximum of 4 attacks, even if you get really a lot of base attack at high iteratives. So that's what you have to think about is you're going to hit 4 at maximum, and it's going to go up at the normal rate it was. Saves. Your weak saves are going to get weaker as you level up higher and higher. That's one of those other things about it. So your bad saves are going to get worse effectively at the higher levels you get. So finding a way to mitigate that is actually probably going to be very important to a lot of your characters at those high levels. Class abilities. If there's a class ability that goes up at a certain numerical rate, that maybe goes up every 3 levels for you, every other level for something like a feat or a sneak attack, it goes up at the same rate. As you go higher into the levels above 20, it would go up just the same amount of rate, higher and higher. Spells. Spells work very interestingly. You get new spell levels every odd level you have above 20th level. So that means at 21st level, you get 10th level spells. Now, I don't have 10th level actual spells to fill this with. What can I fill it with? Metamagic enhanced spells. I would have to have metamagic feats, or I would just have to fill the slot with just a 9th level or lower spell like a normal person would fill up that slot with. But effectively, it's made for metamagic feats to add into. So then 23rd, it would go up another one, 25th, etc., etc. I get new levels of spells. At the even levels, I would get spell slots. The amount of spell slots I get is equivalent to the highest level spell I can cast. So if I can cast 11th level spells, I would get 11 slots worth of levels worth of slots that I could use. What this means is I could split that 11, I could get a 5th level spell and a 6th level spell, I could get a 9th level spell and a 2nd level spell. Whatever levels of spell slots I get has to add up to 11. I could get 11 first level spell slots if I really wanted that many first level spell slots. Now, as a caster that would know spells, something like a sorcerer or a bard, you have an extra option at this point in time. You can choose not to take either of those abilities at the level and instead learn 2 new spells. So I could choose to give up some spell slots in order to learn 2 new spells. I could choose to give up a spell level in order to learn 2 new spells. Now let's move into talking about environments that you're going to encounter and start with the most important and major environments, the dungeon. The dungeon is a place to find strange monsters, old traps, discover treasures. There are all kinds of dungeons out there, and there are 4 main types though. Now, of those 4 main types, there are derivatives of those types, things that are sort of subtypes of them. There are things that are related to them. There are combinations between multiple of these types, but these are the 4 ones that if you're looking for a basic idea of how to structure a dungeon, you should look to. First is the ruins. The ruins means that some kind of ruined area where the creator is probably no longer living there. There's no major source of creatures. There might be wandering beasts, wandering monsters in there. There could have been traps at a time. Most of them are probably going to go off, have been gone off, no longer be in effect. But that's sort of what it is. It's a place where the original creators have long since abandoned. It's in ruins. It's not in great shape. That's the first type. The second kind is an occupied kind of area. This occupied area means that whether or not this is the original creator or some other group, it is currently occupied by a group of creatures. For this one, of course, there's probably going to be less traps, if any, and any traps that are related are controlled, of course, by this group that occupies this dungeon. If there's any beasts around or any wandering monsters, again, those are also probably owned by the occupying forces. And you're going to replace most of those with guard forces and patrols that are going to be going around an area. Granted, there is a derivative of this that you could have some kind of ruins that's half ruins and half occupied. Basically, it could have been some much larger structure that part of it's become occupied by a defending force and part of it is still savage and uncontrolled. Now, of course, any kind of furnishing for an occupied force is going to reflect whatever types of creatures it is, and they're probably going to have some kind of communication way with each other or with the outside world because it makes sense. They're going to need some kind of supplies to survive too, so they're going to have a lot of materials. The next type of dungeon is, of course, the fortification dungeon. This is a place where it's like a fortified area, a treasure hold, a vault, a tomb, something like that, where something important is being kept inside of it. This is oftentimes going to be filled with a lot of different traps, maybe defending guardians, things like that. The traps are going to be there and active. There could be monsters that are there that wandered in, whether just by chance, or there could be ones that were kept there as sort of defenders that have magical ways of sustaining themselves. More often times than not, it's probably going to have things like undead or constructs guarding it because they don't need food or water to survive. But it's effectively a fortified location where someone has put something in it and created a lot of defenses, a lot of like walls and barriers and things that are keeping you from getting into that and claiming whatever important object or thing is in this middle of it. And the last type is natural caverns. Natural caverns are just cavernous areas that maybe some kind of force has occupied or some kind of creatures have occupied over the ages that were created naturally. There is a lot of opportunities to use natural caverns. Now, a lot of funguses grow in natural caverns. Some of them may glow, but those also bring in various levels of creatures and predators too, so you'll find a lot more monsters than anything and probably little to no traps unless someone went through and set up a trap at some point in time, maybe forgot about it, or maybe they died and were unable to get rid of it after they'd already set it up. But traditionally, little to no traps. Now, there are uses for these natural caverns. It could be that natural caverns were used to get into some kind of underground dungeon after it was built, or it could be used to connect certain different dungeons. It's also a way for some kind of natural creature to get into something like a ruined dungeon that is now being occupied by that creature. So natural kind of caverns exist in a very kind of nebulous way that are actually traditionally connected with a lot of these other dungeons anyway, though they could essentially, any of them could be on their own, of course. So that's it for today. I talked about ending your campaign, of course, going to 20th level or a high level capstone of level that you're choosing for your characters, or even going into epic levels if you really want to do that. I then moved over and talked about the basics of dungeon types and talked about the 4 different types of dungeons that you could encounter on your adventures. In the next one, I'm going to move into talking about the dungeon terrain. I'm going to specifically talk about the walls, floors, and doors that you can find within the dungeon when you're exploring it. So if you have questions, comments, anything you want to say, anything you think I left out, please leave in the comments below. Please like, share, and subscribe to support the channel, the Empire, and the work I do. If you want to show some extra support, you can always check out my Patreon, link in the description below. But regardless, until the next time, I bid you farewell.